All right, so today we're going to be doing a deep dive on Nietzsche and his ideas on genealogy and how it completely upends how we think about history.
And it's not just about the facts of history, but like how we've sort of twisted those facts and like how those have turned into the stories that we tell ourselves about the past.
And our guide for this deep dive is going to be Michel Foucault's essay, Nietzsche, Genealogy, History.
Yeah, Foucault's writing can be a little dense, but we're going to try to break it down for you and like see how these ideas can actually change the way that you see the world.
So to kick things off, Nietzsche was really skeptical of searching for the origin of things.
Yeah, he thought that trying to trace everything back to like one perfect starting point is kind of a fool's errand.
Like trying to find the one true meaning of a word by looking it up in the dictionary.
Yeah, you might find some interesting connections, but you're missing like the whole messy evolving story of like how that word has been used and like reinterpreted over time.
Okay, so instead of trying to find that one perfect origin, what Nietzsche calls Ursprung,
hmm
where did he suggest that we look?
Well, he gives us two other concepts to play with, Herkunft and Entstehung.
I'm all ears, but I need you to break those down for me a little.
Of course. So Herkunft is all about tracing the lineage of ideas, like we were talking about with that word origin example. It's about recognizing that our beliefs and values don't just appear out of thin air. They've been shaped by like a long and often very tangled history.
Oh, so you're not just inheriting your grandma's china, you're inheriting her worldview too.
Exactly. It's about unpacking that inheritance and understanding how it has shaped you. And sometimes that inheritance can be a bit dangerous.
Dangerous, you mean like inheriting a family curse?
Not quite. He believed that uncovering this Herkunft can reveal all sorts of hidden biases and like faulty assumptions that we've inherited without even realizing it.
Okay, I see. So Herkunft is about digging into the family history of ideas, but what about Entstehung?
Imagine like witnessing the birth of an idea, seeing how it emerges from a clash of forces, a power struggle, or like a sudden flash of insight.
Okay, so if Herkunft is like a slow, simmering stew of influences, then Ostung is more like a sudden burst of fireworks.
That's a great way to put it. Think of those moments in history where like everything changed, like the invention of the printing press or the discovery of penicillin or like the rise of the internet. Those are all examples of Entstehung, those moments when new ideas kind of emerged and reshaped the world.
And Nietzsche had a specific term for that, like breeding ground for ideas, right?
Yeah, he called it the Entstehungsschuld. Imagine a crucible where different forces collide, creating friction and sparks that ignite those aha moments.
That's such a vivid image. Do you have any examples from the text that really kind of bring these concepts to life?
Well, for instance, he argued that the eye, didn't evolve primarily for peaceful contemplation, but for hunting, the need to spot prey and avoid becoming prey ourselves.
Wow, so even something as simple as like the eye has this complex and maybe even kind of violent history behind it.
Precisely. And he applied that same kind of analysis to all sorts of things. So, for instance, he argued that the history of punishment isn't driven by like some abstract notion of justice, but by like more primal needs like revenge exclusion and the desire to maintain power.
So instead of just accepting like the traditional explanations for why things are the way they are, he wants us to dig deeper to see those hidden motivations and power dynamics that shape our beliefs and institutions.
Exactly. And that's where his idea of effective history comes in. He's not interested in those neat and tidy narratives that try to like smooth over the rough edges.
So effective history is different from how we normally think of history.
Yeah, it's a direct challenge to the idea of history as like a smooth, linear progression towards some ultimate goal or truth. He's saying history is messy, it's chaotic, and it's full of surprises.
So instead of just accepting like the official version of events,
Yeah.
Nietzsche's encouraging us to be more
Yeah.
skeptical.
Skeptical is a good start, but he's asking for more than that.
Oh, okay. So what are some of the hallmarks of this effective history? Like what should we be looking for when we're, trying to put on our detective hats?
Well, one thing that he highlights is discontinuity. Instead of seeing history as a straight line from point A to point B, effective history focuses on those moments where things take a sudden turn, where power shifts, where meanings get twisted, where the underdog becomes the top dog,
Yeah.
you know?
Oh, so instead of focusing on those grand narratives that try to tie everything together neatly, we should be paying attention to the ruptures, the inconsistencies, the moments where the script gets flipped.
You got it. And effective history doesn't just look at the big picture, it also zooms in on those seemingly insignificant details that traditional history often overlooks.
Oh, it's like those forensic scientists on those TV shows. They find like a tiny fiber or speck of dust, and suddenly the whole case breaks open.
Exactly. And this is where his emphasis on the body comes in. He wasn't just interested in abstract ideas. He wanted to understand how history is literally inscribed on our bodies.
Wait, what does the body have to do with history?
Well, think about it. Our bodies aren't separate from history. They carry the marks of the past and our habits, our instincts, even our illnesses.
So we're not just inheriting our grandma's china and her worldview, we're also inheriting her posture, her predisposition to certain diseases.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It's like he's saying that our physical and mental states are shaped by the beliefs and actions of our ancestors, that we're literally embodying the history of our lineage.
Wow, okay, that's a pretty mind-blowing idea.
Yeah.
But how do we actually apply this effective history to our own lives? It all feels very abstract.
That's a great question, and one that we'll definitely dig into more as we go along. But for now, just consider this. Nietzsche is challenging us to become archaeologists of our own lives, to dig into those layers of inherited beliefs and values and ask, where did these ideas come from? How have they shaped who I am? And most importantly, do I still want to carry them with me?
So it's not just about understanding history in like some academic sense. It's about understanding how history has shaped us, our beliefs, our values, even our very sense of self.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning of our journey into Nietzsche's genealogy.
So before the break, we were like getting our minds blown by these ideas of Herkunft and Entstehung. Like I'm still processing the fact that I'm walking around with like my ancestors' worldviews just tucked away in my brain somewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to unpack, but Nietzsche's genealogy isn't just about deconstructing those old narratives. It's also about using those deconstructed pieces to build something new.
So it's not about like tearing down the old building, but using those same materials to create something totally different. And that actually reminds me of something that Foucault said. He said that for Nietzsche genealogy, it cultivates the details and accidents that accompany every beginning. It's about like those little quirks and inconsistencies that traditional history often misses.
Yes, exactly. And this is where Nietzsche's emphasis on the body comes in. He doesn't just focus on abstract ideas or grand narratives. He wants to know how history is experienced in a physical, embodied way.
Okay, I'm going to need you to explain that one. What does the body have to do with history? I thought we were talking about ideas and interpretations.
Well, think about it this way. Our bodies aren't separate from history. They carry the marks of the past. In our habits, our instincts, even our illnesses. There's a line in the essay where Nietzsche says that injustice or instability in the minds of certain men, their disorder and lack of decorum are the final consequences of their ancestors, numberless logical inaccuracies, hasty conclusions, and superficiality.
Hold on, so you're saying that our like physical and mental states are actually shaped by the beliefs and actions of our ancestors? That's a pretty wild thought. It's like we're literally embodying the history of our lineage.
Exactly. He's suggesting that we inherit not just genes from our ancestors, but ways of thinking and behaving that have been passed down through generations. And to truly understand ourselves, we need to understand the historical forces that have shaped us.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But how do we actually do that? Like, how do we apply this genealogical method to our own lives? It still feels kind of abstract.
It's all about digging a little deeper, into your own beliefs and values. Ask yourself, where did these beliefs come from? How have they been shaped by my family, my culture, my education? Have I ever really stopped to question why I believe what I believe?
You know, when you put it like that, I bet we'd all be surprised by how much of what we think and believe is actually inherited and not something that we've consciously chosen.
Right, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's important to be aware of those influences, to question them, to see if they still serve us. It's like he's saying, don't just accept your inheritance blindly. Unpack it, examine it, and decide what you want to keep and what you want to discard.
So it's about taking ownership of our intellectual and emotional baggage, not just letting it define us. It's about recognizing those subtle, singular, and sub-individual marks that Foucault mentions in the essay.
Exactly. And that process can be incredibly empowering. Once you see those historical forces at play in your own life, you can make more conscious choices about how you want to live, what you want to believe, and what kind of future you want to create.
So this is starting to feel less like a history lesson and more like self-help with a really serious intellectual edge.
Yeah. And don't forget, Nietzsche was also deeply concerned with the relationship between history and power. He saw how historical narratives are often used to justify existing power structures and hierarchies.
It's like the old saying, history is written by the victors. Right?
Exactly. But he's challenging us to see through those narratives, to recognize the hidden agendas and the power plays at work.
So it's about understanding that history is never neutral. It's always told from a particular perspective, and that perspective often reflects like the interests of those in power.
Right. And he wasn't just talking about political power. It can be social power, cultural power, even the power dynamics within a family or a group of friends. His genealogical method encourages us to question those power dynamics, to see how they've shaped our understanding of the past, and to imagine alternative ways of being and relating to one another.
So Nietzsche's genealogy isn't just some abstract intellectual exercise. It has like real-world implications for how we understand power identity and our place in the world.
Yes. And this brings us back to his idea of effective history, which, as Foucault puts it, introduces discontinuity into our very being. It's about breaking free from those comfortable linear narratives that often serve to maintain the status quo.
So instead of seeing history as like this smooth, inevitable march toward progress, we need to embrace the bumps, detours, and those totally unexpected twists and turns.
Exactly. Effective history recognizes that progress is not guaranteed, and that often the most significant moments in history are those where the established order is disrupted, challenged, or completely overturned.
It's like those moments where the seemingly impossible suddenly becomes possible. There's times when the script gets flipped and like the underdogs rewrite the story.
Right. And remember, he's not romanticizing those disruptions. He's not saying that all revolutions are good or that progress is inevitable, but he is saying that we need to be aware of the potential for change, to see those cracks in the foundation, and to recognize that the story is never truly over.
Okay, so if we embrace this genealogical approach to history, what does that mean for how we live our lives today?
Well, for one thing, it means being more critical of those grand narratives that try to explain everything. It means recognizing that history is always, to some extent, an interpretation, and that our understanding of the past is shaped by our own values, biases, and experiences.
So it's about embracing a little humility and recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
And it's also about being open to different perspectives, to seeing the world through the eyes of others, even those whose experiences and beliefs might be very different from our own.
It's like that saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. But in this case, it's walk a mile in someone else's history.
I love that. And by doing that, we can start to break down those barriers that divide us and create a more just and equitable world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Questioning our own beliefs, recognizing the role of power in shaping historical narratives, and embracing the potential for change. But there's one more piece of this puzzle that we haven't talked about yet, and that's Nietzsche's concept of the will to power.
Yes, the will to power. This is a big one, and it's absolutely crucial to his genealogical approach to history.
All right, so break it down for me. What exactly did he mean by will to power?
It's a really complex concept, but at its core, he's talking about a fundamental drive that exists in all living things, a striving for growth, expansion, and overcoming. And it's not just about dominating others, it's about reaching your full potential, pushing beyond limitations and creating something new.
So less about brute force and more about a kind of creative energy that drives us to evolve and achieve.
Exactly. And he believed that this will to power is a major driving force in history. It's what motivates individuals, shapes societies, and propels us forward as a species.
So instead of seeing history as like this series of random events, we need to understand it as a stage where this will to power is constantly playing out, clashing with itself and creating new possibilities.
Precisely. And that will to power doesn't always manifest in positive ways. It can lead to conflict, oppression, and even destruction. But it can also be the source of incredible creativity, innovation, and social progress.
So it sounds like a double-edged sword with the potential for both great good and great harm.
Exactly. And that's why his genealogy is so important. It helps us to see how this will to power has played out in the past, to understand its potential consequences, and to make more conscious choices about how we want to use that power in our own lives.
Okay, so I see how the will to power is really central to understanding history. But how does it connect back to his three uses of history, those tools for disrupting those comfortable historical narratives that we talked about earlier?
Well, the parodic use helps us see how the will to power can be misdirected, leading us to cling to false identities or pursue empty goals. It reminds us that not all expressions of power are equal, and we need to be discerning about the kinds of power that we choose to cultivate.
So it's about figuring out which expressions of the will to power are life-affirming and which ones ultimately lead to stagnation or even self-destruction.
You got it. And the dissociative use of history helps us to see how the will to power can be a source of internal conflict. It reminds us that we're not singular unified beings, but rather a collection of competing desires, impulses, and motivations.
So instead of trying to suppress or deny those internal conflicts, we need to acknowledge them, understand them, and find ways to integrate them into like a more holistic sense of self.
Exactly. And finally, the sacrificial use of history helps us to see how the will to power can become a dangerous obsession. Sometimes in our pursuit of knowledge, power, or control, we end up sacrificing our own well-being or even our humanity.
It's like a warning sign reminding us that not all knowledge is worth pursuing, and that sometimes the pursuit of power can blind us to the consequences.
Precisely. By understanding these different ways in which the will to power can manifest, we can start to make more conscious choices about how we live and the kind of impact we have on the world.
Okay, so we've explored Nietzsche's skepticism toward the origin, his ideas about Herkunft and Entstehung, his concept of effective history, his three subversive uses of the past, and now his concept of the will to power. I feel like my brain is doing backflips. But I'm still left with the question, like, what's the ultimate takeaway here? What does it all mean for me, for anyone listening?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And honestly, it's one that each of us needs to grapple with individually. But here's what I find so compelling about his genealogy. It doesn't offer easy answers or comforting narratives. He's challenging us to think for ourselves, question our assumptions, and embrace the complexity and messiness of history, both personal and collective.
So it's less about finding the right answer and more about developing those critical thinking skills and the courage to question everything.
Exactly. It's about becoming what he called a free spirit, someone who is willing to think beyond conventional wisdom, challenge the status quo, and create their own meaning in a world without preordained truths or fixed identities.
That's an inspiring vision, but also a little daunting. It's like he's saying, okay, I've given you the tools. Now go out there and build your own damn world.
That's both the challenge and the beauty of his philosophy. He doesn't give us a blueprint, but he gives us the tools to become architects of our own lives and creators of our own destinies.
Okay, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here, but there's one more thing that I want to touch on before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, and that's his critique of morality.
Ah, yes. This is a big one, and it's deeply connected to his genealogical approach.
Okay, so help me understand this. How does his critique of morality tie into his view of history?
For him, morality wasn't some timeless objective truth handed down from on high. He saw it as a product of history, shaped by power dynamics, social conventions, and even biological instincts.
So instead of seeing good and evil as like these absolute categories,
Yeah.
he's saying our moral values are actually fluid and dependent on like the historical context in which they emerge.
Exactly. And he was especially critical of what he called slave morality, a system of values that he believed arose from resentment and a desire to control the strong. He argued that this type of morality stifled creativity, individuality, and the full expression of the will to power.
So he's suggesting that certain moral systems can actually be harmful, like holding us back from achieving our full potential.
Yes, and his genealogical method is a way of uncovering like the hidden agendas and power dynamics that shape our moral beliefs. He wants us to question those beliefs, to see them as products of history, and to consider whether they're still serving us or actually holding us back.
So it's not about rejecting morality altogether, but becoming more aware of how our moral beliefs have been shaped and whether they truly align with our own values and aspirations.
Exactly. He believed that by questioning those conventional moral systems, we could create a new, more life-affirming ethic based on individual strength, creativity, and the pursuit of self-actualization.
That's a pretty radical idea, especially in a world where so much of our social and political discourse is framed in terms of like good versus evil, right versus wrong.
It is radical, and it can be challenging to really grasp, but I think that's part of what makes him so compelling. He forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, to think beyond the easy answers, and to take responsibility for creating our own values and shaping our own destinies.
So it's about embracing the freedom and the responsibility that comes with recognizing that morality isn't something imposed on us from the outside, but something that we create and recreate through our choices and actions.
Exactly. And by understanding the historical forces that have shaped our moral beliefs, we can start making more conscious choices about what values we want to embrace and what kind of world we want to create.
Okay, so welcome back to the show. We've been on like this crazy journey with Nietzsche, exploring everything from like the family history of our ideas to like the power dynamics that are hidden in those official versions of history.
And in this last part of our deep dive, we're going to try to bring it all together and see how his ideas can help us navigate the crazy complexities of the world that we live in today. I mean, let's face it, those old narratives and ways of thinking just aren't really cutting it anymore, are they?
No, they're not. With the constant barrage of information and conflicting perspectives and that feeling that everything's changing faster than ever, it's hard to know what to believe or even where to begin making sense of it all.
And that's where his genealogy can be so helpful. It gives you this framework for critically examining the narratives that you're bombarded with every single day, whether it's from the media, politicians, or even your own family and friends.
So it's about developing that historical sense that Foucault was talking about, that ability to see beyond the surface and understand the deeper forces that are shaping our world.
Precisely. And remember, this isn't about becoming a cynic or just dismissing everything you hear. It's about developing a more nuanced and sophisticated understanding of how history works, how power operates, and how your own beliefs and values have been shaped by the past.
So it's about becoming more aware, more critical, and ultimately more empowered to make conscious choices about how you engage with the world around you.
Exactly. And one of the most inspiring things about his genealogy is that it's not just a method of critique, it's also a call to action.
Wait, a call to action? I thought we were talking about history, not activism.
That's what makes it so powerful.
Hmm.
He saw history not as something that's static and fixed, but as this dynamic process that we can actively participate in shaping. Remember his concept of effective history. It's not just about understanding the past, it's about using that understanding to create a different future.
So it's recognizing that you're not just a passive recipient of history, but you're an active participant in creating it.
Right. And that means you have a responsibility to question the narratives that are being used to justify injustice, to challenge the power structures that perpetuate inequality, and to create new stories that are more aligned with your values.
So how do we do that? How do we take these really abstract concepts and actually put them into practice in our daily lives? It feels kind of overwhelming.
It all starts with the small everyday choices you make, It's about questioning those assumptions that you take for granted, speaking up against injustice when you see it, and supporting those who are working to create a more just and equitable world.
So it's not about grand gestures or heroic acts. It's about those consistent everyday efforts that collectively can make a real difference.
Exactly. And remember, he was all about embracing individuality and cultivating your own unique strengths and perspectives. So it's about finding your own unique way to contribute, whether that's through your work, your relationships, or your creative pursuits.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in shaping the future, and that even our seemingly small actions can ripple outwards and create a more beautiful world.
Yes. And it's about embracing that challenge with courage, creativity, and a healthy dose of skepticism towards anyone who claims to have all the answers.
So in a way, his genealogy is a call to be more conscious, more critical, and more courageous in the way that we engage with the world around us.
Absolutely. And remember, this is an ongoing process. It's not about reaching some endpoint of perfect knowledge or moral purity. It's about embracing the journey of self-discovery, the constant questioning, and the willingness to evolve as you learn and grow.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Nietzsche's genealogical approach to history, what is the one key takeaway that you want our listeners to remember?
History isn't just a story about the past. It's this living, breathing force that shapes our present and influences our future. And by understanding the complexities of history, questioning those assumptions, and embracing your power to create change, you can become an active participant in shaping a world that's more equitable and more fulfilling for everyone.
Wow, beautifully put. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. And we hope that it has inspired you to see history in a whole new light, to question the narratives that shape your world, and to really embrace the power that you have to create positive change.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what you thought was possible.
And never forget, the story's never really over. It's up to all of us to write that next chapter.